I'm Stephanie Mitchell, 32, and I still hear the crash of my grandmother's antique vase shattering against the wall. My brother Ethan's face contorted with rage, as family heirlooms became weapons, his voice thundering through our childhood home. "This was my birthright," he screamed, pointing directly at me. Stunned relatives watched in horror as 20 years of sibling bond disintegrated before their eyes. "You've destroyed everything I've worked for," he spat. "This family is dead to me now." How did we get here? Let me tell you. Before I dive into this painful story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that subscribe button if family drama resonates with your own experiences. Trust me, this journey through betrayal and resilience is one you won't want to miss. The Mitchell name has always carried weight in Boston financial circles, though you wouldn't know it from our modest lifestyle. My grandfather built his tech company from nothing in the 1970 seconds, eventually selling it for what my father called generational security. We lived well but weren't flashy about it, a principle my grandparents insisted upon. "Money doesn't define character, but it certainly reveals it," my grandmother would say, usually while volunteering at the community center or reviewing charitable donations. This philosophy extended to how they structured our inheritance. When I was 10 and Ethan was 12, our grandparents established trust funds for all their grandchildren, myself, Ethan, and our cousins Ryan and Ashley. The terms were specific. We'd gain full access at 35, with limited withdrawals permitted before then for education, medical emergencies, or first home purchases. The trust administrator, a family friend named Walter Green, had discretion over special circumstances withdrawals, which required demonstrating financial responsibility. "These aren't lottery tickets," grandfather explained during the family meeting. "They're tools for building meaningful lives." At 10, I barely understood what a trust fund was, but I remember Ethan's eyes widening at the figures discussed. Our personalities were already distinctly formed by then. I was the careful planner who saved birthday money and made lists of pros and cons before any purchase larger than a book. Ethan was the risk taker, the dreamer who saw opportunities everywhere and consequences nowhere. He'd spend his allowance within hours of receiving it, then craft elaborate schemes to earn more. These traits followed us into adulthood. I became a financial advisor, building my own client base, separate from the family wealth. I found satisfaction in helping others secure their futures through careful planning and measured risks. Meanwhile, Ethan bounced between entrepreneurial ventures, a clothing line that folded after 2 seasons, a food delivery app that never launched, a cryptocurrency investment group that dissolved amid regulatory concerns. Each failure was always someone else's fault, never a result of his haphazard planning or impulsive decisions. Our grandmother's death 8 months ago shifted the family dynamic dramatically. She'd been our mediator, the voice of reason when tensions rose. At her funeral, I noticed Ethan checking his phone during the eulogy, later overhearing him discussing some business deal with a stranger during the reception. My parents noticed too but said nothing, following their long-established pattern of avoiding confrontation with him. Signs of Ethan's financial problems had been mounting. He and his wife Megan had moved into a luxury condo in the city's most expensive district. He drove a new Tesla but complained about the property taxes on their vacation home in Vermont. Instagram showed exotic vacations and exclusive restaurants, while his LinkedIn announced a new venture every few months, each described as revolutionary and disruptive, though none seemed to generate actual revenue. Our family dinners became showcases for Ethan's latest ideas, with our parents nodding encouragingly while I bit my tongue. My fiancé James, a structural engineer with a pragmatic outlook, would squeeze my hand under the table when Ethan's claims became particularly outlandish. "Your brother could sell ice in Antarctica," he'd whisper afterward, not entirely as a compliment. Megan, Ethan's wife of 3 years, only amplified his tendencies. A former marketing executive, she had a talent for packaging Ethan's ideas into compelling narratives, regardless of their substance. "You need to think bigger." She'd tell him loudly enough for everyone to hear. The Mitchells should be a household name. During this time, Ethan began asking pointed questions about my trust. How much I could access, what qualified as special circumstances. I deflected, uncomfortable with his interest in my finances, while noticing Head started cultivating a relationship with Walter Green, meeting him for golf and sending expensive whiskey at Christmas. "I'm worried about Ethan," I confided to James one night. "Something feels off. He's always pushing boundaries," James replied. "But lately it feels like he's desperate." Have you noticed how he keeps mentioning that trust money isn't working hard enough sitting in investments? I had noticed. I just didn't realize it was foreshadowing the storm that was about to hit our family. The quarterly Mitchell family dinner in April should have been a celebration of spring and new beginnings. Mom had decorated with fresh tulips from her garden, and Dad was grilling his famous herb-crusted lamb chops. Cousins Ashley and Ryan had driven in from Connecticut and New Hampshire respectively. James had brought a selection of wines from a local vineyard we'd visited the previous weekend. When Ethan and Megan arrived 30 minutes late, I sensed something was different. Ethan was uncharacteristically attentive, asking about everyone's work and plans. Megan was dressed more formally than usual, in what I recognized as her client presentation outfit from her marketing days. "I'd like to make an announcement," Ethan said as we finished our main course. He pulled out his iPad and connected it to the dining room TV. Something had clearly planned in advance. "I've been working on something revolutionary, and I wanted my family to be the first to know." The next 45 minutes transformed our family dinner into a boardroom pitch. Ethan unveiled NeuroSync, a platform that would revolutionize how businesses understand consumer behavior, using proprietary AI algorithms and next-generation biometric feedback. The slides were professional, filled with impressive-looking charts and testimonials from two former tech executives I didn't recognize. "We're projecting a market valuation of $50 million within 18 months, Ethan declared, showing a hockey stick growth projection. "Our initial seed funding round is nearly complete, but I've reserved the anchor investment opportunity for family." My financial advisor brain was cataloging red flags. His revenue projections assumed capturing 15% of a market that seasoned companies had been fighting over for years. His operating costs seemed significantly underestimated, and the technology he described would require a development team far more extensive than the lean, elite crew of innovators he mentioned. But it was his next statement that made my stomach drop. "Stephanie," he said, turning directly to me with the confident smile he'd perfected since childhood. "As I mentioned when we spoke last month, I'd like to formalize your commitment to invest $1.5 million as our anchor investor. With Walter's approval for the special circumstances withdrawal from your trust, we can have the funds transferred by next Friday and announce your involvement at our launch party." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. My mind raced. We had discussed no such thing. The only recent conversation about his business had been a vague mention over coffee where Head said he might have an opportunity for me soon. Nothing about amounts, nothing about commitments. "Ethan," I said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never discussed any specific investment, and certainly not an amount like that." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Don't be modest, Steph. You said you were excited about getting involved. The paperwork is already being drawn up." "I said I'd be happy to look at your business plan when it was ready," I corrected, feeling the tension thickening. "I never committed to any investment." Mom jumped in with forced cheerfulness. "This all sounds very exciting, Ethan. Maybe you two should discuss the details privately later." "There's nothing to discuss," Ethan insisted. Stephanie agreed to this. "The launch party invitations are already printed with the Mitchell family listed as founding investors." James shifted beside me, and I knew he was restraining himself from intervening. The dinner had become unbearably uncomfortable, with Ryan studying his plate and Ashley shooting me sympathetic glances. "I'll need to thoroughly review the business plan," I said firmly. "I can't commit to anything tonight. The opportunity window is closing." Ethan pressed. "Our other investors are waiting on your commitment before finalizing their own." Dad cleared his throat. "Son, if Stephanie needs time, she's had time." Ethan cut him off. "We discussed this weeks ago. She's just getting cold feet." The dinner deteriorated from there. Ethan alternated between pressuring me and acting as though my investment was already secured when talking to others. When James attempted to ask questions about the technology, Ethan dismissed him with, "It's proprietary and that's getting into the technical weeds." Later that night, James and I sat in our living room, still processing what had happened. "Has lying," James said flatly. "You never agreed to any investment. Has done this before," I admitted. "Assumes agreement where there was none. But never with stakes this high. Something doesn't add up." James mused. "Why specifically $1.5 million? And why the rush?" The next morning, I received a text from cousin Ashley. "Ethan called Ryan last night asking for $200K for his startup. Said you were already in for $1.5 million. Is that true?" That afternoon, a formal-looking email arrived from Ethan with a subject line NeuroSync investment documentation. The attachment was a term sheet listing Stephanie Mitchell Trust as providing $1.5 million in seed funding. My worry deepened when my assistant mentioned that someone from NeuroSync had called to verify my employment for investment partnership paperwork. I decided it was time to do some serious investigation before this went any further. I've always believed that trusting without verifying is just wishful thinking disguised as faith. So, despite the family pressure already building through a barrage of texts from Ethan, the transfer paperwork needs your signature by Friday. I dedicated the next week to investigating NeuroSync. First, I examined the business plan Ethan had finally sent. Not the glossy presentation from dinner, but the actual 40-page document. Using my financial advisor expertise, I dissected every projection, every market analysis, every assumption. The flaws were numerous and concerning. Customer acquisition costs severely underestimated, development timelines unrealistically compressed, competitor analysis notably incomplete. The proprietary technology that was supposedly revolutionary remained vaguely described, with references to patents in process but no documentation. I arranged coffee with my mentor Tyler Warner, who had guided my career for a decade. After reviewing the materials, his assessment was blunt. "This isn't a business plan, Stephanie. It's a fantasy with spreadsheets," he said, sliding the documents back across the table. These projections would be ambitious for a team with multiple successful startups behind them and $10 million in funding. For a new company with unproven technology? Impossible. Could it just be over-optimism? I asked, still hoping to find some explanation other than deliberate deception. "Look at page 27, Tyler replied. "They're projecting a 40% profit margin in year 2, in an industry where established leaders struggle to maintain 15%. That's not optimism. That's fiction." Next, I discreetly contacted several venture capital firms in Boston, presenting myself as a potential co-investor researching NeuroSync. The responses were revealing. 4 firms confirmed they had already declined to invest after preliminary meetings. One associate was particularly forthcoming. The founder couldn't answer basic technical questions, she told me. When pressed, he became defensive and suggested we weren't visionary enough to understand the potential. "We see hundreds of pitches a year, and this had all the red flags of a concept without substance." The most disturbing discovery came from Uncle Robert, who called me unprompted. "Stephanie, did you know Ethan told me you were putting in $1.5 million as lead investor? He asked me for $300,000 last week, said it was a friends and family round before the institutional money comes in. Did you invest?" I asked, my stomach nodding. "I said I'd think about it," he replied. But Ashley called me afterward with concerns. "Is something going on?" Through careful conversation with other family members, I learned Ethan had approached at least 5 relatives for priority investment opportunities, each time using my supposed commitment as leverage. The total he was attempting to raise from family alone exceeded $2.3 million, but the most alarming revelation came from Rachel Dawson, who contacted me through LinkedIn after seeing Ethan's announcement post about NeuroSync. "You don't know me," her message began, "but I was Ethan's business partner in TrendMapper 2 years ago. I invested $180,000 of my savings. The company never launched the product, and he refused to account for the spending. I eventually discovered he had been paying himself a $12,000 monthly development stipend while outsourcing the actual coding to an overseas firm for a fraction of our budget. We met at a quiet cafe outside the city. Rachel, a software developer with 15 years of experience, described a pattern of behavior that chilled me. Ethan making technical claims he couldn't substantiate, becoming hostile when questioned, manipulating investors with false urgency, and spending lavishly on business development that seemed mostly to involve expensive restaurants and travel. "I should have sued him," she admitted, but he made it clear he would drag it out until my legal fees exceeded what I might recover. I chose to walk away and rebuild my savings instead. My final discovery came accidentally. While meeting a client near Boston's Innovation District, I spotted Ethan entering a sleek office building. Curious, I waited, then entered the lobby to check the directory. NeuroSync was listed on the 14th floor, prime real estate, commanding at least $15,000 monthly in rent. Through a friend in commercial real estate, I confirmed Ethan had signed a 3-year lease 2 months earlier, with the first 6 months' rent paid in advance. He had also hired 4 full-time employees and contracted with a design firm for a complete office build-out. The picture became clear. Ethan had already committed to expenses that would burn through cash at an alarming rate, likely assuming my trust fund would cover the shortfall. When I accessed the trust account records, I discovered he had already inquired about the withdrawal process, presenting himself as discussing options on my behalf. Most disturbingly, through a casual comment from Megan's sister at a charity event, I learned about Ethan's gambling debts. What had started as poker nights with investors had apparently escalated to significant losses at underground games. The $1.5 million he sought wasn't just for the business. With this evidence compiled, I made my decision. I wouldn't be investing in NeuroSync. More importantly, I needed to ensure no other family members were drawn into what increasingly looked like a desperate financial scheme, rather than a legitimate business opportunity. I prepared a gentle but firm explanation, along with alternative suggestions. I could connect Ethan with legitimate investors if his technology was viable. I could recommend business plan consultants to strengthen his proposal. I could even offer a much smaller personal loan, not from the trust, to help him develop a proper prototype. What I couldn't do was hand over $1.5 million to a venture that showed every sign of being built on quicksand. Now I just had to tell him. I suggested meeting at Harrington's, a upscale restaurant with private dining areas where we could talk without interruption. I arrived early, already feeling the weight of the conversation ahead. The maitre d' led me to a corner table partially secluded by decorative screens, perfect for what would likely become an emotional discussion. Ethan arrived 15 minutes late, impeccably dressed and radiating confidence. He ordered an expensive scotch before even sitting down, complimenting the server by name as though he were a regular. "I've been calling you all week," he said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of irritation. "The investment paperwork needs to be processed. We're announcing the funding round completion at next week's launch party." I took a deep breath. That's what I wanted to discuss, Ethan. I've reviewed the business plan thoroughly, and I can't invest in NeuroSync. His smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes. "What do you mean, can't? The trust has the funds. Walter already indicated it would qualify as a special circumstance. I've spoken with Walter myself," I clarified. "He never approved this. And after reviewing the business plan and market viability, I don't believe this is a sound investment. You don't understand the technology," he dismissed, waving a hand. "This isn't a traditional market analysis situation. I understand enough," I countered gently. "The projections don't align with industry standards. The technology specifications are vague. And I've discovered you've already been turned down by several venture capital firms." His expression hardened. "Those VC idiots are too risk-averse. They'll be begging to get in on our Series A when we prove the concept." "Ethan, I've prepared some alternatives." I slid a folder across the table. "I'm willing to help you refine the business plan. I can introduce you to some legitimate angel investors, if the technology is viable. I could even consider a personal loan of $50,000 to develop a proper prototype." 50,000. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that caused nearby diners to glance over. "That wouldn't cover our office expenses for a month. I need the $1.5 million, the full amount." "I can't do that," I said firmly. "It would be irresponsible." "Irresponsible." His voice rose. "What's irresponsible is sitting on millions while your brother builds something that could revolutionize the entire Mitchell name. This isn't just about money. It's about legacy. If it's not about money, then my alternatives should help," I reasoned. He leaned forward, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You don't get it. The office lease is signed. Staff are hired. The development team in Singapore is halfway through the initial build. The deposits for the launch event are paid. Everything is in motion. You did all that without secured funding." I couldn't hide my shock. "Because you said you were in." He slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. "You said you supported me. I never agreed to invest, Ethan. Not once. Not ever." His face transformed then, calculation replacing anger. "Everyone thinks you did. Mom, Dad, Uncle Robert, Ryan. They all know you committed to being our anchor investor." The implication was clear. Had been systematically telling everyone that my investment was secured. "That's not true, and you know it," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "What I know," he replied, ice in his tone, "is that I've spent over $200,000 based on your commitment. Money I don't have because I was counting on your investment." The restaurant seemed to fade around us as the truth emerged. This wasn't just about a startup or family support. Ethan had created financial obligations based on money he didn't have, assuming he could pressure me into covering his decisions. I can't bail you out of commitments you made without any actual agreement from me, I said. The mask dropped completely then. He stood up, looming over the table. You have no idea what you've started, he hissed, loud enough for nearby diners to turn in alarm. You think you're the responsible one? The smart Mitchell? You're nothing but a coward hiding behind spreadsheets while I actually try to build something. Ethan, please sit down, I urged, mortified by the scene unfolding. The family will know exactly who you really are. He continued, grabbing his coat. The trust fund princess who couldn't support her brother's one chance at making something of himself. He threw down his napkin and stormed out, leaving me sitting alone with a half-finished meal and the stares of other patrons. The server approached cautiously, asking if everything was all right. I nodded mechanically, requested the check, and sat in stunned silence. In the car afterward, I broke down completely. Had I made the right decision? Was I being overly cautious? The doubt gnawed at me, along with the guilt of denying my brother something he clearly wanted desperately. But beneath those emotions, a harder certainty remained. Ethan had deliberately misrepresented my involvement to create pressure. He had made financial commitments based on money that wasn't his. Those weren't the actions of an honest entrepreneur facing temporary setbacks. They were the tactics of someone willing to manipulate others to cover his own recklessness. I called James, my voice still shaking. It went worse than I imagined. Come home, he said simply. Well, figure it out together. What I didn't realize then was that Ethan had already begun his campaign of retribution. The family division had only just begun. The fallout was immediate and devastating. My phone exploded with messages the next morning. Mom asking, how could you do this to your brother? Dad suggesting I reconsider for the sake of family harmony. Cousin Ryan questioning my sudden change of heart about the investment. Ethan had clearly been busy, solidifying his narrative that I had betrayed a previous commitment. I tried calling my parents to explain, but the conversation went nowhere. He's just passionate about his business, Mom insisted. You've always been the cautious one. Sometimes family means taking risks for each other. This isn't about caution, I argued. It's about Ethan misrepresenting everything. The business viability, my supposed commitment, even his conversations with Walter about the trust. Your brother wouldn't lie about something this important, Dad replied, the certainty in his voice crushing me. They had already chosen their side. Sunday dinner the following weekend became the first battlefield in what would become a prolonged family war. I arrived with James, steeling myself for tension, but unprepared for the coordinated attack that awaited. Ethan and Megan were already there, along with Ryan and his wife, Uncle Robert and Aunt Karen. Only cousin Ashley was missing, having texted me earlier, can't make it today. Call me after. This whole situation seems off. The initial small talk was painfully strained. When we sat down to eat, Ethan waited until the main course to spring his trap. I wanted everyone to know, he announced, that despite Stephanie's unexpected reversal, NeuroSync is moving forward. We've had to scale back significantly and let go of 2 key developers, but we're determined to succeed even without family support. The sympathetic murmurs around the table made my stomach turn. I never reversed anything, I said clearly. I never committed to investing in the first place. Ethan's expression was perfectly calibrated between hurt and resignation. We discussed it multiple times. You were excited about being part of something groundbreaking. That's simply not true, I maintained. Perhaps Stephanie's memory is different, Megan suggested with practiced concern. She's been under a lot of pressure with her own work. Before I could respond, Ethan launched his most shocking accusation yet. I've always wondered if Stephanie had any influence over how grandfather structured the trusts. It seems convenient that her restrictions are slightly different than mine. The table fell silent. He was suggesting I had somehow manipulated our grandfather's estate planning, an outrageous claim considering the trusts were established when we were children. That's absurd, James interjected, unable to remain silent any longer. The trust terms are identical for all grandchildren. The only difference is how you each approach using them. Stay out of this, Ethan snapped. You're not even family yet. Dad attempted to mediate. Let's all calm down. This is business, not personal. It became personal when my sister decided her spreadsheets were more important than my future, Ethan retorted. The dinner devolved further from there. Through careful comments and pointed questions, I discovered that Ethan had been systematically spreading his version of events at family gatherings I hadn't been invited to. Lunch with our parents, drinks with Ryan, even a shopping trip with Aunt Karen, where Head portrayed me as coldly withdrawing support at the last minute. leaving him in a desperate financial position. Uncle Robert, who had remained quiet most of the evening, finally spoke up. "I've been in business for 30 years, he said slowly. "And one thing I've learned is that legitimate opportunities don't require pressure tactics or rushed decisions." Ethan's face darkened. "Of course you'd side with her. The cautious Mitchells sticking together while those of us trying to build something get undermined." "No one's undermining you," Uncle Robert replied evenly. "But I've looked at your business plan too, and the numbers don't add up." This unexpected support should have been comforting, but it only intensified the division. Aunt Karen immediately defended Ethan, revealing she'd already invested $100,000 in NeuroSync, despite knowing about the discrepancies in his story. "Sometimes family means believing in each other," she declared, echoing my mother's earlier sentiment. As we prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "Can't you find some compromise? Maybe a smaller investment to help him get started?" "Mom, he's telling everyone I already committed to this. Hess made financial decisions based on money that isn't his. That's not passion, it's manipulation. Has always looked up to you," she insisted, though this claim contradicted everything I knew about our relationship. "Don't let money come between siblings." I left feeling hollow, wondering how my family could so easily accept Ethan's version of events, despite the inconsistencies. Only later did I learn from Ashley that Ethan had been carefully cultivating this narrative for months, dropping comments about my promised investment in casual conversations, ensuring the idea was planted long before he formally asked. The final confirmation of how far Ethan's campaign had gone came 3 days later, when Megan appeared at my office unannounced. My assistant, looking uncomfortable, showed her in. "You need to reconsider," she said without preamble. "Ethan has put everything into this venture, including money he doesn't have, based on commitments I never made," I replied. Her perfectly composed expression slipped for a moment. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to him? To us? We've leveraged everything for NeuroSync. That was your decision, not mine. The family sees what you're doing," she continued. "Even your clients are starting to ask questions." "What does that mean?" I asked, suddenly alert. She smiled thinly. "Word gets around in Boston financial circles. People wonder why someone wouldn't back their own brother's business. Makes them question your judgment." The threat was thinly veiled. Ethan and Megan were prepared to damage my professional reputation if I didn't cooperate. As she left, she dropped a final comment. "Family reconciliation dinner at your parents' next Saturday. I suggest you come prepared to announce your change of heart." I didn't attend that dinner. Instead, I spent the evening with James and cousin Ashley, piecing together the extent of Ethan's deceptions and preparing for what was clearly becoming a campaign of retaliation. What I didn't anticipate was just how far my brother was willing to go. The first sign that Ethan had moved beyond family pressure came when I received a notification about a new review on my professional profile. Advised family member to invest in high-risk venture that failed completely. When questioned, denied all responsibility. Would not recommend, though posted under a generic username. The timing and specific wording made the source obvious. 2 more similar reviews appeared within days. Then clients began canceling appointments. First a couple, then several more. When I called one long-term client to ask why, his response was telling. "I received some concerning information about your investment practices. Nothing personal, but I need to be cautious with my portfolio." James suggested we document everything, creating a timeline of Ethan's escalating behavior. "This is crossing from family disagreement into deliberate sabotage," he warned. The professional attacks were concerning, but what happened next crossed into truly disturbing territory. After a particularly draining day of damage control with clients, I returned to my car in the office parking garage to find Trader scratched deep into the paint across the driver's side door. The security cameras in that section of the garage had mysteriously malfunctioned that afternoon. Though I couldn't prove Ethan's involvement, the message was clear. This wasn't stopping with professional reputation. James began receiving similar treatment at his engineering firm. Anonymous emails to his supervisors questioned his professional judgment, citing fabricated examples of reckless decision-making. His recent promotion was suddenly under extended review. "This isn't about the business anymore," James said as we documented each incident. "This is punishment." The breaking point came when we returned home one evening to find our front door unlocked. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, but all our family photos had been removed from their frames and torn to pieces. In my home office, files were disorganized, and my computer showed signs of being accessed. We called the police immediately, The responding officer took notes but seemed skeptical. Family disputes are complicated, he said, despite our insistence that this was breaking and entering, without clear evidence of who did this. The next day, I confronted Ethan directly, meeting him at a public coffee shop where his behavior might be constrained by witnesses. I know what you're doing, I said without preamble. The reviews, the clients, the car, our home. He sipped his latte calmly. Sounds like you're having a difficult time. Stress can make people paranoid. This needs to stop, Ethan. Breaking into our home crosses every line. His expression never changed. You have a cleaning service with a key, right? Old house, temperamental locks. Could be anything. The police are involved now, I warned. Good luck with that, he replied. I was having dinner with Mom and Dad last night, plenty of witnesses to my whereabouts. As I turned to leave, disgusted by his smug denial despite the evidence, he added, by the way, how secure do you think your client's information is on your home computer? Would be terrible if confidential financial data somehow became public. The implied threat sent me straight to my attorney's office. Hes escalating, I explained to Miranda Jeffries, my longtime legal advisor. I'm worried about what comes next. She recommended immediate steps, changing all locks and security codes, installing cameras, securing digital information, and filing for a restraining order based on the threats and vandalism. Family courts are reluctant to get involved in sibling disputes, she cautioned, but the break-in changes things. While we implemented these security measures, my parents remained firmly in Ethan's corner. When I called to tell them about the break-in, my father's response was heartbreaking. Are you sure you're not overreacting? He asked. Ethan says you've been making concerning accusations. Someone broke into our home, I repeated, stunned by his dismissal. If you'd just help your brother out, my mother chimed in from the extension. All of this unpleasantness could end. The final blow came when I discovered Ethan had somehow accessed my personal financial documents, investment statements, trust information, even tax returns. During a heated phone call with my parents about their continued support of Ethan despite his behavior, my mother inadvertently revealed the source. He was just trying to understand the trust restrictions better, she said defensively. Your father gave him access to the family filing cabinet to find the original trust documents. The betrayal cut deep. My parents had given Ethan access to my personal financial information, stored in their home office, from when I had used their address during a move years ago. When I expressed my shock and anger, my father became defensive. Hes your brother. It's all family. Why are you so secretive unless you have something to hide? That night, James held me as I finally broke down completely. They've chosen him, I sobbed. No matter what he does, they'll always choose him. Then we need to protect ourselves, James said firmly. It's time to stop hoping this blows over and start treating it like what it is, a deliberate campaign to force you to give him money. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would stop trying to convince my family of Ethan's manipulations and focus entirely on protecting myself, James, and my assets from my brother's escalating attacks. The gloves were coming off. After weeks of enduring Ethan's escalating attacks, I realized that merely defending myself was insufficient. It was time to be proactive rather than reactive. This wasn't about winning a family argument anymore. It was about protecting everything I had worked for. My first step was meeting with Daniel Peterson, the attorney who specialized in trust law and had worked with my grandfather. His office, with its oak paneling and shelves of leather-bound legal volumes, provided a sense of solidity I desperately needed. Based on what you've described, Daniel said after reviewing my documentation, your brother is engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, defamation, and possibly criminal activities, all aimed at coercing you to release trust funds. Can the trust be protected? I asked. I'm worried he'll find some way to access it directly. Daniel's response was reassuring. The trust was structured specifically to prevent impulsive or coerced withdrawals. Your grandfather anticipated family pressure, though perhaps not this extreme. Well, file for additional protections immediately, requiring multiple levels of verification for any withdrawal requests. We spent 3 hours strengthening the legal barriers around my assets. By the time I left, I had implemented new security protocols, changed all authorized contacts, and established a recorded verification system that would prevent anyone from impersonating me. My next ally emerged unexpectedly. Cousin Ashley called, asking to meet urgently at a small cafe outside the city. I've been gathering information, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were screenshots of messages from Ethan to various family members, each containing slightly different versions of events, obviously crafted to turn them against me. Has been doing this for months, Ashley explained. Different stories for different relatives, all designed to isolate you while positioning himself as the victim. Why are you helping me? I asked, genuinely curious given the family pressure. Because 3 years ago, Ethan asked me to invest in his cryptocurrency venture. I almost did, until I discovered he'd been manipulating the projected returns. When I confronted him, he threatened to tell my parents about my girlfriend, before I was ready to come out to them. Her expression hardened. I won't let him do to you what he tried to do to me. With Ashley's help, we began countering Ethan's narrative. She shared information with relatives who were still open to hearing both sides, while I focused on documenting every instance of harassment and sabotage. My mentor Tyler provided crucial professional support, reaching out personally to clients who had received concerning anonymous information about me. As a respected figure in Boston's financial community, his endorsement helped stem the client exodus. This isn't just about your practice, Tyler advised. Document everything for potential legal action. What he's doing constitutes tortious interference with business relationships. The most shocking discovery came when I received an urgent call from Walter Green, the trust administrator. Someone attempted to process a withdrawal from your trust yesterday, he explained, his voice grave. They had documents with what appeared to be your signature authorizing $1.5 million for business investment purposes. That's impossible, I gasped. I never signed anything. I suspected as much, which is why I implemented the verbal verification protocol we established years ago. When asked about your first pet's name, they provided an incorrect answer. I felt physically ill. Was it Ethan? The request came through a lawyer claiming to represent you, but the paperwork had Ethan listed as the recipient of the funds. The attempted fraud crossed every conceivable line. I immediately filed a police report, providing the forged documents Walter had secured as evidence. With these pieces in place, it was time for a decisive move. I requested an emergency family meeting at my parents' home, insisting that everyone needed to hear critical information. To my surprise, they agreed, perhaps sensing the gravity of the situation from my tone. That Saturday, the core Mitchell family gathered in the living room, where we'd spent countless holidays and celebrations. My parents sat stiffly on the sofa, Aunt Karen and Uncle Robert took the armchairs, and cousins Ryan and Ashley perched on dining chairs we'd brought in. Ethan and Megan arrived last, his expression smugly confident, until he noticed the projector screen ID set up. What's this about, Stephanie? My father asked, his voice weary. Evidence, I replied simply, and began my presentation. Over the next 40 minutes, I methodically displayed the documentation of Ethan's campaign, the contradictory messages he'd sent to different family members, the professional sabotage, the timeline of escalating harassment, and finally, the forged trust withdrawal documents. This isn't a misunderstanding or a business disagreement, I concluded, my voice steady despite my racing heart. This is a deliberate pattern of deception, manipulation, and now fraud. The room sat in stunned silence until Ethan erupted, knocking over a side table as he stood. This is all manufactured. She's trying to destroy me because she can't stand that I might succeed where she hasn't. The documents are authenticated, Ethan. I replied calmly. The police have them now. Police, my mother whispered, her face ashen. Yes, I confirmed. Forgery is a criminal offense. Uncle Robert spoke first among the shocked relatives. I had my doubts about some of what Ethan was claiming, but this is beyond anything I imagined. You're all falling for her manipulations, Ethan shouted, but his usual charm had evaporated, replaced by naked desperation. She's always been jealous of me. Stop it, Ethan, Ashley said firmly. I've seen the different stories you told everyone. It's all documented. As the family began processing the evidence, Megan pulled Ethan aside, their heated whispers suggesting she hadn't been fully aware of the extent of his actions. When they returned, her composed facade had cracked considerably. My father, looking suddenly older than his years, turned to Ethan. Did you forge your sister's signature on trust documents? Ethan's response was a masterclass in deflection. The investors were waiting. She promised to help and then left me hanging. What choice did I have? The admission, wrapped in justification though it was, sent shockwaves through the room. The remaining family support for Ethan crumbled as the reality of his actions became undeniable. As the meeting broke up, my mother approached me tearfully. I didn't want to believe he could do something like this. I'm so sorry, Stephanie. It was a beginning, but the family fractures wouldn't heal overnight. As everyone departed, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. The countermove had worked, exposing Ethan's deceptions, but the cost to our family was immeasurable. What none of us realized was that the final confrontation was yet to come, and it would shatter whatever fragile family bonds remained. Thanksgiving arrived with a tentative truce hanging over the Mitchell family. After the emergency meeting that exposed Ethan's manipulations, my parents had insisted we maintain the tradition of gathering for the holiday. Family is still family, my mother had said during her invitation call, her voice carrying both determination and uncertainty. I arrived with James at my parents' colonial-style home, the familiar scent of roasting turkey and my mother's sage stuffing failing to soothe my apprehension. Cousin Ashley and Uncle Robert's family were already there, their warm greetings a balm after months of tension. Dad was trying too hard to be normal, discussing football standings with forced enthusiasm. Mom fluttered between the kitchen and dining room, arranging her grandmother's china with trembling hands. Ethan confirmed he's coming, she whispered to me while James was distracted by Uncle Robert's fishing stories. Please, for today, can we just... It'll be civil, I promised. But I won't pretend nothing happened. The atmosphere shifted palpably when Ethan and Megan arrived 90 minutes late, just as Mom was considering serving without them. Ethan's eyes were glassy, his movements too expansive, signs I recognized from college parties. He was intoxicated, though trying to hide it. Happy Thanksgiving, Mitchells, he announced too loudly. The prodigal son has returned. Megan shot me an apologetic glance, confirming my suspicion that their delay had involved an argument about his condition. Her makeup was heavier than usual, possibly concealing tears. The initial awkwardness might have dissipated if Ethan had matched our collective effort at civility. Instead, he launched into a charm offensive, complimenting Mom's cooking effusively, and engaging Dad in reminiscences about childhood Thanksgivings. The performance was skillful, but had an edge of desperation that set my nerves on edge. When we finally sat down to eat, the conversations remained carefully superficial. Weather, football, Ashley's new job, Ryan's children's school achievements. No one mentioned businesses, investments, or the trust funds. Ethan maintained his jovial facade, though I noticed he refilled his wine glass frequently. It was during the serving of pumpkin pie that he finally dropped his bombshell. Before we finish this lovely meal, he said, tapping his glass with a spoon, I wanted to share some exciting news. My stomach tightened as all eyes turned to him. Despite recent misunderstandings in the family, he continued, NeuroSync is moving forward, and to secure our next phase of development, I've arranged to sell grandmother's antique collection to a private collector in New York. The silence that followed was absolute. Grandmother's antiques, the Tiffany lamps, the Victorian silver, the hand-painted porcelain, were family heirlooms intended to pass through generations. Those aren't yours to sell, my father said slowly. They're in storage, until your mother and I decide how to distribute them. Ethan's smile never wavered. Actually, I've already moved them to a dealer in preparation for the sale. They're serving as collateral for a bridge loan until the transaction completes next week. You've what? My mother's voice rose sharply. Ethan, those aren't yours. I needed to secure funding after my initial investor backed out, he replied, his gaze sliding meaningfully to me. Family assets should support family ventures. I'm sure grandmother would approve. The room erupted in overlapping voices, Dad demanding Ethan return the antiques immediately, Mom alternating between shock and tearful pleas, Uncle Robert asking pointed questions about which dealer was involved. Through it all, Ethan maintained his position with the calm certainty of someone who knows they've created an irreversible situation. It's essentially done, he insisted. The paperwork is signed. The collection is being appraised tomorrow. Those aren't legally yours to sell. I finally interjected. That's theft, Ethan. His expression darkened. Always the legal expert, aren't you, Steph? Always knowing what's best for everyone, while the rest of us try to actually build something meaningful. Building something doesn't justify stealing family heirlooms, Ashley exclaimed. Ethan's careful composure finally cracked. He stood abruptly, nearly toppling his chair. You want to talk about stealing? How about stealing opportunity? How about choking someone's dreams because of some arbitrary trust rules and risk assessments? He began pacing, his movements becoming more agitated. The antiques were just sitting in storage, doing nothing, just like Stephanie's trust millions. Sitting there, accumulating interest while I'm out there fighting to create something that could change everything for all of us. By committing fraud, Uncle Robert challenged. By doing whatever it takes, Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on the dining room credenza. The violent movement sent my grandmother's cherished crystal bowl crashing to the floor, shattering into countless glittering shards. The destruction seemed to trigger something in him. With a sweep of his arm, he sent the nearest display of family photos flying. You think I'm the problem? You think I'm the one breaking this family? What followed was pure devastation. Ethan moved through the room like a hurricane, targeting the remaining family heirlooms my parents had kept in the house. The antique vase that had stood in the foyer for 40 years, the mantel clock from my great-grandfather, the framed needlepoint my grandmother had created for my parents' wedding. Ethan, stop, my mother screamed, while my father attempted to physically restrain him. James and Uncle Robert joined the effort, finally managing to immobilize him against the wall. Megan stood frozen, her expression a mixture of horror and resignation, as though she'd seen similar outbursts before. Let me go. Ethan struggled against their hold. You're all against me. You've always been against me. Perfect Stephanie and her perfect life, while I'm just the family disappointment, right? In that moment, with destruction surrounding us and my brother's rage exposed for all to see, he made one final desperate attempt to regain control. His voice suddenly softened, his eyes finding mine over my father's shoulder. Remember when we built forts in the backyard, Steph? Remember how we promised to always look out for each other? What happened to us? The childhood memory, one of the few genuinely happy ones we shared, struck like a physical blow. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy who had once helped me conquer my fear of climbing trees, who had shared his Halloween candy when I was sick one year. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had systematically attempted to destroy my reputation, my relationships, and my security when I refused to fund his schemes. We grew up, I answered quietly, and became who we truly are. This isn't over, he said, his voice suddenly cold again. I've already spoken to an attorney about the trust. There are ways to challenge the distribution, legal precedents for undue influence. Go ahead, I replied, exhausted by the cycles of manipulation. The documentation speaks for itself. As Uncle Robert and James released him, Ethan straightened his clothing with exaggerated dignity. Enjoy your perfect little life while it lasts, Steph. This family may believe your version of events now, but legal proceedings have a way of uncovering the truth. With that final threat, he stalked out, leaving Megan to follow with mumbled apologies. The front door slammed with such force that another picture fell from the wall, its frame splintering on impact. In the devastated dining room, surrounded by broken heirlooms and shocked family members, we stood in stunned silence until my mother began quietly weeping. As Dad moved to comfort her, the reality of what had just happened settled over us all. The Mitchell family would never be the same again. Later that night, after helping clean up the physical damage, James and I sat on my parents' porch swing, the same one where Eid spent countless summer evenings as a child. You know he can't actually challenge the trust, right? James said softly. It's ironclad. I know, I replied, but that's not what tonight was really about. What was it about then? I watched the November moon rising over the trees my grandfather had planted decades ago. Control. He couldn't control me with manipulation or threats, so he did the only thing left. Tried to destroy what matters to us all. As we drove home that night, I realized the confrontation, painful as it was, had finally broken whatever hold Ethan's manipulations had maintained over the family. Sometimes shattering is the necessary prelude to rebuilding something stronger, but only if you're willing to face the damage honestly. The weeks following Thanksgiving unfolded in a blur of practical necessities and emotional aftershocks. My parents filed a police report about the stolen antiques after Ethan refused to disclose their location. The family lawyer sent formal cease and desist letters regarding his threats of legal action against the trust. Despite these decisive actions, a heavy cloud of grief hung over every Mitchell family interaction. I keep replaying everything. My mother confessed during our first private lunch after the confrontation. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred her tea, wondering where we went wrong with him, what signs we missed. This isn't your fault, Mom, I said, covering her hand with mine. Ethan made his choices. But we enabled those choices, she replied, her eyes filling with tears. Always making excuses, always stepping in to fix his mistakes. We thought we were showing love, but maybe we were just teaching him that consequences didn't apply. This new clarity from my parents, while validating, brought its own kind of pain. Part of me had wanted them to acknowledge Ethan's manipulations for so long, yet seeing their heartbreak gave me no satisfaction. The right outcome still felt wrong somehow, tainted by the destruction that had forced their enlightenment. In January, we received the news that Ethan and Megan had left the country. My cousin Ryan, who maintained limited contact with them, reported they had relocated to Singapore, supposedly to work with NeuroSync's development team. The timing, just days before their scheduled interview with police regarding the antiques, suggested a less noble motivation. He left behind a mountain of debt, my father revealed during a family meeting to discuss the aftermath. Credit cards, personal loans, even second mortgages we knew nothing about, and the NeuroSync office lease, abandoned with 3 months of unpaid rent. Uncle Robert, who had connections in the legal community, helped the family navigate the complex process of protecting themselves from Ethan's creditors without enabling his financial irresponsibility. We can contest any claims against family assets, he explained, while still cooperating with legitimate investigations. The physical distance brought both relief and new challenges. While the immediate threat of confrontation disappeared, the emotional weight remained. I found myself hesitating before checking my email each morning, bracing for fresh attacks that no longer came. This persistent anxiety finally drove me to seek professional help. Dr. Elaine Winters, a therapist specializing in family trauma, became my weekly anchor as I processed the complex grief of losing a sibling who was still alive. "What you're describing is ambiguous loss," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "Your brother isn't gone in the literal sense, but the relationship you thought existed, or hoped could exist, is gone. That's a uniquely painful type of grief. The hardest part is the doubt," I admitted. "Even knowing everything he did, I still wonder if I could have handled things differently." "That's because you're approaching this with empathy and responsibility," she replied. "But responsibility doesn't mean accepting blame for someone else's actions. You can acknowledge your part in a relationship dynamic without taking ownership of another person's choices." These sessions helped me separate guilt from grief, allowing me to mourn the relationship without drowning in self-recrimination. Slowly, I began rebuilding my sense of security, both professionally and personally. James remained my steadfast support throughout, never once suggesting that my family's dysfunction reflected on me. When he proposed in April, a simple, heartfelt moment on the harbor walk where we'd had our first date, his words reflected our shared journey through the storm. "I don't want to wait any longer to make us official," he said, presenting a vintage sapphire ring. "Life is too uncertain, and what I'm certain about is you." 6 months after Thanksgiving, we hosted a family dinner at our newly purchased home, a symbol of moving forward, rather than remaining trapped in the past. My parents, Uncle Robert, and Aunt Karen, cousins Ashley and Ryan with their partners, all gathered around our dining table, the conversation gradually becoming more natural, less guarded. "I found something interesting last week," Uncle Robert mentioned as we served dessert. "A letter your grandfather wrote when he established the trusts. His reasoning for the structure was illuminating." He passed around a photocopied page in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "Wealth without wisdom becomes a burden, not a blessing. My hope is that these funds will support my grandchildren's dreams without becoming their identity. The greatest inheritance I can leave isn't money, but the values that guide its use." A thoughtful silence followed as we considered how prophetic those words had been. The unexpected epilogue to our family saga arrived in July. A letter from Ethan, postmarked from Bangkok. My hands shook as I opened it, preparing for fresh accusations or demands. Instead, I found something that resembled, however imperfectly, accountability. In treatment," he wrote. "Not by choice initially. Megan gave me an ultimatum after things fell apart in Singapore. But I'm starting to see patterns I've spent a lifetime denying. I don't expect forgiveness, and am not asking for financial support. I just needed you to know that I'm facing what I've done. Maybe someday I can make amends, but I understand that's my responsibility, not your obligation." I shared the letter with my parents, who received their own version a week later. We approached this development with cautious optimism, aware that recovery from destructive patterns requires more than words on paper. Still, It represented the first acknowledgement of reality from Ethan in our entire adult relationship. As summer transitioned to fall, I found myself contemplating the trust that had become both the catalyst and casualty of our family fracture. The funds that had been portrayed as divisive could perhaps serve a more constructive purpose. Working with Daniel Peterson and my financial expertise, I established the Mitchell Foundation for Entrepreneurial Integrity, using a portion of my trust to fund education and mentorship for young business founders. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program, teaching ethical business practices alongside innovation, creating something positive from our family's painful lessons. During the foundation's launch event, surrounded by aspiring entrepreneurs, mentors, and family members who had weathered the storm together, I found myself reflecting on the true meaning of inheritance. The wealth my grandfather had built provided opportunity, but the real legacy wasn't in the dollars Head accumulated. It was in the values Head tried to instill: the importance of integrity over expediency, substance over appearance, relationship over transaction. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of those who had supported me through the darkest chapter of my life, I offered the wisdom hard-won through loss and recovery. Family wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the courage to love each other enough to speak the truth, even when it breaks your heart. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer isn't unconditional support, but the willingness to set boundaries that protect what matters most. And what matters most is never the money, but the people behind it, and the principles that guide its use. Has your family ever faced difficult financial decisions that tested relationships? I'd love to hear your experiences and how you navigated those challenging waters. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes our most painful experiences become our most valuable lessons. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the wisdom to navigate your own family complexities with both compassion and courage.